The year is 1945. Berlin, once the heart of a terrifying empire, is ablaze, its screams echoing across a continent ravaged by war. As the Allied vice tightens and the Third Reich crumbles into the dust of its own ambition, one ghost slips away: SS officer Heinrich Vogel. He melts into the cacophony of collapse, vanishing as if he were never there. His last phantom sighting places him near the Austrian border, a civilian coat draped over his uniform, a forged pass clutched in his hand, and two unknown shadows accompanying him into the encroaching darkness. When the war finally chokes out its last breath, Vogel's name is a mere footnote, lost among the thousands presumed dead. Yet almost immediately the whispers begin, a chilling chorus carried on the wind. He hadn't died, he had escaped. Vogel was a logistics officer for the Waffen-SS, a man whose mind was a fortress of meticulous planning and cold surgical precision. Those who endured his presence described him as unnervingly calm, a methodical specter, even amidst the maelstrom of catastrophe. As the tide of war turned irrevocably against Germany, Vogel was dispatched to Salzburg, a mission veiled in the deepest secrecy: secure sensitive materials for the Reich's southern command. The true nature of these materials remains a chilling enigma. By April 1945, Vogel himself had become an enigma, evaporating between the collapsing front lines and the imposing silent mountain passes of Austria. The years bled into each other, marked by the relentless pursuit of Allied investigators sifting through the charred remains of Nazi archives, desperate for a whisper of Vogel's fate. Nothing. His body was never found, his grave never consecrated. Yet, as if summoned by the void he left, strange reports began to surface, like unsettling tremors beneath the earth. A man matching his description, seen boarding a Red Cross convoy in the war-scarred landscape of Italy. Another shadow glimpsed at a safe house near the Spanish border. And then, the most unsettling report of all. A dockworker in Genoa, his face etched with disbelief, swearing he saw a man with Vogel's pale blue, unforgettable eyes, boarding a freighter bound for the distant shores of South America. For the world, the war was a brutal, definitive end. But for a select, sinister network of men like Heinrich Vogel, it was merely the grim beginning. In the smoldering ashes of defeat, a new clandestine mission was taking shape, a blueprint for disappearance, for survival, for rebuilding in the deepest shadows. Later, it would be known by a name that still sends a shiver down the spine: Operation Silence. The war had ceased its roar, but the ghosts of the Reich were already stirring, moving unseen beneath the fragile surface of post-war Europe. An insidious underground network began to breathe, smuggling SS officers, scientists, and collaborators out of the devastated continent. Its whispered name: Odessa, a secret lifeline for the architects of a dead empire, weaving through Italy's broken ports and Spain's sympathetic harbors. False identities were meticulously forged, documents stamped with lies, and safe passage bought with gold plundered from the ruins of Germany. These clandestine routes became infamous as rat lines, pathways that led not to justice but to sinister reinvention. Ships, under false manifests, slipped away from Genoa, Venice, and Cadiz, their passengers listed as innocuous technicians or refugees. Their destinations: Buenos Aires, Santiago, Montevideo. South America became their sprawling sanctuary, its dense, unforgiving jungles and fledgling governments fertile ground for those who yearned to vanish without a trace. Among the names that haunted intelligence circles in the late 1940s, one resonated with disturbing persistence: Hans Wollmer, a German engineer living with deceptive modesty in Genoa, tall, with a distinctive scar along his jaw.
British intelligence agents were convinced Vollmer was an alias for Vogel. An intercepted letter, penned in cautious, coded phrases, spoke of friends in the colonies and work that must continue. But by the time agents converged on the apartment, it was an empty husk. No forwarding address, no echo of where he had gone. Locals recounted how a man matching Vollmer's description had boarded a cargo ship, the Santa Lucia, on a humid June morning in 1949, bound for Buenos Aires. Passenger lists were mysteriously altered, records later lost to a convenient fire. All that remained was a single chilling customs entry. No inspection. After that, Vogel, if it was indeed him, was never seen again. Like so many who fled across the vast Atlantic, he dissolved in rumor, reborn in silence, leaving behind only questions that would echo through generations. By 1950, the world was tentatively rebuilding, the ashes of war slowly being swept away. But in quiet, unyielding corners of Europe, a handful of men and women refused to forget. They were the tireless investigators of Interpol's fledgling war crimes division, exhausted, overburdened, yet relentless. Among the names on their ever-present lists, one always seemed to lead to a dead end: Heinrich Vogel. His file was achingly thin, a single faded photograph, a handful of fragmented army records, and a few terse interrogation notes from captured officers who vaguely claimed he had gone south. They meticulously scoured archives in Munich and Vienna, painstakingly requested manifests from every Italian port, even interviewed priests who had, under duress or sympathy, issued false baptismal certificates to men seeking new identities. Every lead, however promising, dissolved into contradiction. One witness swore Vogel had drowned, desperately crossing into Switzerland. Another adamantly insisted he had been executed by Soviet forces near Prague. A third vividly described a Captain Vogel living peacefully in a monastery near Seville, only for the trail to vanish into yet another dead man, another mistaken identity. The deeper they dug, the more the evidence seemed to evaporate. Files went missing. Reports were inexplicably misplaced. Testimonies were redacted or, more disturbingly, outright destroyed. Some investigators began to harbor a chilling suspicion. Someone, somewhere, was quietly protecting Vogel, meticulously scrubbing his paper trail clean. By 1957, his name was officially purged from the most wanted registry. The world, it seemed, had moved on. Families of his victims pleaded for answers that never came. Memorials were erected, photographs framed, and history began to settle into an uneasy, suffocating silence. Vogel likely perished in the chaos of war, read the final Interpol memo. It was far easier to believe he was dead, another ghost lost to the ruins of Europe, than to confront the terrifying possibility that he might still be out there. And for a while, the world did believe that, until, decades later, a startling discovery in a dusty attic would shatter that certainty forever. It began with an attic in Hamburg in 1972. Historian Klaus Reinhardt was meticulously cataloging the estate of a recently deceased industrialist, a man who had once supplied materials to the German army. Amidst towering stacks of faded invoices and rusted trunks, he stumbled upon a small tin box, its surface obscured by yellowed newspaper. Inside lay a bundle of letters, bound with brittle twine and stained by the relentless march of time. Most were mundane receipts, routine business correspondence, but three stood out, a stark anomaly. They were postmarked Buenos Aires, 1951, and each bore the chillingly familiar initials, H.V. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, Germanic in its cold precision.
The first letter spoke of a new life in the colonies and of friends among the old order. The second painted a picture of land purchased beyond the city, where the air is dense and the trees never end. The third was shorter, almost poetic, and far darker. "The jungle accepts all who wish to disappear," it read. There were no addresses, no names, but the tone, confident, tinged with nostalgia, and faintly paranoid, was unmistakably that of a man accustomed to absolute command. Reinhardt immediately contacted the authorities, who confirmed the stamps were authentic, printed in Argentina during the early Perrin years. For investigators, it was the first tangible evidence in nearly 3 decades that Heinrich Vogel, or whoever he had become, had survived the war and meticulously carved out a new existence half a world away. But the letters also carried a profound sense of unease, as if their author was writing not merely to report his safety, but to issue a chilling warning to someone else still hidden. And beneath the closing words of the final letter, faintly scrawled in pencil, was a phrase no one could quite decipher, something about the fortress in the green. It would take another 40 years before anyone truly understood its terrifying meaning. Stories, like resilient weeds, have a way of surviving, even when facts wither and fade. In the rugged borderlands between Paraguay and northern Argentina, the locals still whisper tales of the man with the scar. He was tall, pale, with a striking streak of white through his hair and a faint, unplaceable accent. He arrived sometime in the early 1950s, accompanied by crates of tools and lumber, escorted by men who kept to themselves, their faces like closed books. He introduced himself as Signor Woolmer, claiming he had come to farm the land. Yet he never sold crops, never hired workers, and rarely ventured beyond the impenetrable embrace of the jungle. What he did possess was gold, small ancient coins stamped with eagles and unfamiliar markings. He paid for everything in cash, often overpaying, as if to preempt any unwelcome questions. Those few who dared to approach his property spoke of a massive wooden house, almost swallowed by walls of thick green vines and towering palm trees, a structure far too elaborate, too fortified for a simple farmer. The locals, in hushed tones, called it La Fortaleza, the fortress. On certain mornings, villagers swore they heard the drone of engines overhead, small aircraft circling low, landing on a mysteriously cleared field behind the enigmatic house. Some claimed uniformed men came and went, carrying briefcases and heavy boxes wrapped in oilcloth. Others swore they heard German voices echoing through the valley when the wind carried their whispers just right. For nearly a decade, Signor Woolmer remained an enigma. Polite but distant, generous but profoundly secretive. Children dared each other to sneak close to the property, returning with breathless tales of armed guards and the faint, acrid smell of burning chemicals. Then, one night in 1959, the lights of La Fortaleza abruptly went dark. The planes ceased their visits. A wisp of smoke briefly rose above the jungle canopy, and by dawn, the colossal house was swallowed by an eerie silence. When locals finally mustered the courage to approach days later, the gates hung open, the air heavy with the scent of ash. Inside, the compound was utterly deserted. No bodies, no luggage, no sign of struggle, just silence. The man with the scar was gone, as if he had never existed at all. Time, an indifferent sculptor, buried La Fortaleza beneath its own burgeoning legend. The relentless jungle swallowed the paths, mighty trees burst through concrete foundations, and memories faded into the realm of myth. Decades passed before the world heard of it again. In 2013, an agricultural surveyor named Diego Pereira was meticulously mapping state-owned land near the Paraguayan border when his drone footage captured something profoundly unusual: perfectly straight lines in a landscape where nature crafted only curves.
He ventured out the next day, machete in hand, and unearthed the haunting remains of an enormous structure, hidden beneath decades of rampant overgrowth. Vines clung like grasping fingers to collapsed beams, and beneath the moss lay walls of reinforced concrete, an anomaly in a region where homes were typically built from humble wood or clay. Scattered among the debris were fragments of porcelain, starkly stamped "Made in Bavaria," a broken radio transmitter, and a rusted Mercedes staff car, its insignia carefully, deliberately filed off. The discovery immediately drew archaeologists, then journalists, and then, ominously, men in unmarked vehicles who brusquely ordered everyone off the site. Within a week, the entire area was sealed. The official explanation claimed the ruins were merely a colonial-era estate of no historical significance. But those who had seen the unsettling photographs whispered otherwise. The materials were too modern, the layout too precise, the lingering insignia too chillingly familiar. Someone, they knew, had built a fortress in the jungle, a place designed not to be found. News spread quietly, like a ripple through the towns along the Parana River. "The Nazi jungle house has been found," they murmured, and though the government staunchly denied it, everyone knew the story of the man with the scar. Some said he had been a war criminal, others a fugitive priest or a mad scientist. But when asked his real name, the oldest villagers always gave the same answer, spoken softly, almost fearfully, as if the very forest might still be listening: Vogel. By 2015, the rumors had swelled into an undeniable roar. The story of the hidden fortress deep within the South American jungle reached Buenos Aires, where it snagged the attention of the National Institute of Anthropology. Within months, a small dedicated team, led by Dr. Emilia Sora, embarked on an arduous expedition to verify what locals had whispered about for generations. Their journey carved a path through miles of tangled undergrowth, past rivers that glowed an ominous orange at dusk, and through valleys where the very air seemed to hum with oppressive heat. When they finally reached the site, what they beheld defied all expectation. Massive stone foundations jutted from the soil, choked by moss and strangler fig. A collapsed staircase plunged into what appeared to be an underground storage area. Scattered through the debris were artifacts unmistakably European in origin: porcelain emblazoned with the seal of a German manufacturer, rusted cutlery stamped with eagle insignia, and coins bearing the chilling year 1943. Dr. Sora, her voice hushed, described the scene as frozen in time. Among the grasping vines, they unearthed sealed green wine bottles, dated to the same fateful year, their corks still intact, the labels written in old Gothic script. Nearby, fragments of a radio transmitter and a box of syringes wrapped in decayed gauze hinted at a truth far more sinister than merely a residence. This had been a base. The most startling find, however, emerged from beneath a pile of bricks in what had once been the study. A small iron safe, its hinges fused shut with the implacable grip of rust. The archaeologists carefully, reverently carried it out, brushing away the decades of soil that clung to it like a shroud. News of the discovery spread almost instantaneously. Headlines around the world screamed the same sensational phrase: "Lost Nazi hideout found in South American jungle." The accompanying photos showed smiling archaeologists standing triumphantly beside the half-buried ruins. But beneath the palpable excitement ran a darker, more unsettling question. Who had built this place? And what terrifying secrets had they been hiding that warranted a safe sealed in steel and secrecy for more than 70 years? The safe was opened in Buenos Aires under meticulously controlled conditions. After days of painstaking cleaning, technicians finally pried it open, releasing a stale, heavy gust of air that hadn't touched daylight since the 1950s. Inside lay objects that transformed rumor into horrifying reality. Several passports, brittle with age, lay stacked together. Each bore a different name and nationality: Hans Vollmer, Heinrich Faber, Johann Keller. But the photographs, chillingly, were all of the same man, tall, sharp-featured, with that unmistakable scar along his jaw. Beneath the passports was a collection of black and white photographs showing a man in SS uniform standing beside a large wooden house, the very same structure now half devoured by the voracious jungle. Another photograph depicted him seated at a desk beside two other men, both wearing the grim medals of the Totenkopf division. Folded neatly beneath the photos was a small leather-bound diary. The pages were fragile, inscribed in cramped German shorthand, interspersed with strange symbols, half code, half scripture. As linguists began the painstaking process of decoding it, the entries grew increasingly cryptic. Vogel, or Woolmer, wrote of the Brothers of the Sun, a clandestine circle devoted to preserving what he chillingly called the flame of the Reich. He described mysterious shipments arriving from the north, experiments in the Green Chamber, and frequent visits from pilgrims of the order. The final entry bore a single line, scrawled in hurried, desperate ink: "The new Reich will rise not in stone or flag, but in the shadows of those who remember." For Dr. Sora, it was no longer merely an archaeological dig, it was an exhumation of history itself, a terrifying resurrection. Every artifact, every whispered fragment told the same story. Heinrich Vogel had survived the war, escaped to the unforgiving jungles of South America, and built a sanctuary for men who, in their twisted hearts, believed the Third Reich had never truly ended. The explosive findings from the safe ignited a global wave of scrutiny. What began as an archaeological expedition swiftly mutated into a sprawling criminal investigation, spanning continents. Old intelligence files were dusted off and reopened, and a disturbing, tenacious thread began to emerge, one that linked Vogel not just to his jungle hideout, but to one of the darkest, most carefully guarded secrets of post-war South America.
Deep in the imposing mountains of southern Chile lay Colonia Dignidad, a German settlement founded in 1962 under the deceptive guise of a charitable mission. To the unsuspecting outside world, it was a peaceful religious commune, a bastion of order and piety. In terrifying truth, it was a fortress, a walled compound ruled with an iron fist by former Nazi medic Paul Schaefer, where unspeakable acts were perpetrated under the cruel banner of discipline and faith. When Argentine investigators cross-referenced the coded entries from Vogel's diary with declassified Chilean intelligence reports, the overlap was undeniable, chilling. Shipments, innocuously listed as agricultural equipment, were meticulously traced to Colonia Dignidad. Bank records revealed funds wired from a defunct Buenos Aires account, an account that had once belonged to Hans Vollmer. More unsettling still were the harrowing testimonies of former residents who had, against all odds, managed to flee the colony. Several remembered a formidable visitor they called Capitan Hans, a stern, uniformed man with that distinctive scar along his jaw, who would inspect the grounds and lecture ominously about unfinished work. One survivor recalled how the man spoke of the purity of the bloodline and the rebirth of order. Another described him as calm, polite, like a priest who had seen hell and wanted to rebuild it. When shown photographs recovered from the safe, all of them, without hesitation, pointed to the same face, Heinrich Vogel. But the evidence remained circumstantial, fragments of memory and paper, half burned by the relentless passage of time. Officials hesitated to declare it definitive proof. The world, after all, had learned to doubt the extraordinary, to resist the most unsettling truths. Yet, as investigators painstakingly pieced the fragmented puzzle together, one horrifying realization solidified. Vogel's insidious influence had not died in the jungle. It had spread quietly, deliberately, through the scattered colonies of exile. And somewhere in that blurred, terrifying nexus of religion, science, and impenetrable secrecy, his vision of a new Reich in the shadows had taken root. When Dr. Sora's team returned to the site later that year, their focus sharpened on a section of the ruins previously dismissed as mere storage. Beneath collapsed beams and rotted timber, they discovered a stairway plunging ominously into the earth. At its bottom, a narrow room awaited, its tiled walls and rusted tables speaking of a grim purpose. What they unearthed there transformed the legend of Vogel from a whispered myth into an undeniable horror. Glass beakers lay shattered across the floor. Microscopes, surgical tools, and chemical flasks, meticulously labeled in German, had fused into grotesque lumps of corrosion. In one corner sat a generator, starkly marked Siemens 1942, its cables snaking into the concrete like monstrous, lifeless veins. On the wall hung a chalkboard, its surface covered with faded equations and unsettling anatomical sketches. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared to be an abandoned medical lab. To Dr. Sora, her face pale, it was unmistakably something far more sinister, a place of experimentation.
Local villagers, emboldened by the shocking discovery, began to share the stories their parents had once whispered in fearful tones during the 1950s. They spoke of strange lights that flickered above the trees at night, of animals found grotesquely mutilated near the riverbanks. Some recounted tales of workers who went missing after being hired to clear the encroaching jungle. Others recalled a mysterious sickness that had swept through a nearby village, fevers that burned for days, followed by sudden, terrifying silence. The symptoms matched no known disease. Among the debris, the team recovered fragile glass vials etched with serial numbers identical to those used in wartime Germany's biomedical research programs. Samples were hastily dispatched to forensic labs. The results were inconclusive, but chillingly suggestive. Whatever had transpired in that underground chamber had not been simple science. Dr. Sora steadfastly refused to speculate publicly, but in private she confessed her profound fear. Heinrich Vogel had not merely been hiding from justice, he had been continuing his heinous work, experiments born in the ashes of the Reich, perfected in the profound, sinister silence of the jungle. The ancient forest had concealed his monstrous crimes for decades, but now, at long last, it seemed to whisper their terrible secrets back to the waiting world. In early 2017, the story that had long been confined to dusty archives and hushed archaeological journals suddenly became profoundly personal. In Berlin, a 67-year-old woman named Clara Vogel received a phone call that would unravel every certainty she held about her family. The voice on the other end belonged to an Argentine journalist, working in conjunction with international investigators. DNA testing, he explained carefully, meticulously, had linked her to bone fragments discovered near La Fortaleza. Clara listened in stunned silence, the words settling like a suffocating layer of dust on old, carefully buried memories. Her father, she explained, had been a diplomat who vanished when she was a mere 6 years old. His name was Heinrich Vogel. Her mother had long insisted it was a tragic, unfortunate coincidence with a different man of the same name. Growing up in the fractured landscape of post-war Germany, Clara had learned not to ask questions. There were photographs in her childhood home, grainy images of her father in impeccably tailored suits, never in uniform, always with a polite, enigmatic smile. But there were shadows, too. Visits from stern, silent men who spoke in hushed tones in the kitchen, a locked trunk in the attic, its contents a forbidden mystery, a mother who would abruptly change the subject whenever the war was mentioned, her eyes clouding with an unspoken grief.
As she matured, Clara began to suspect that her family's meticulously crafted story had been rewritten, carefully edited. Her mother had told neighbors he had died in a tragic accident abroad. Yet every few years a letter would arrive, without a return address, typed, impersonal, signed only H. They ceased arriving in 1959, the same year the lights of La Fortaleza went dark. When the journalist asked if she believed her father had escaped Germany, Clara hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "I think he ran from something, but maybe not just from the war? Maybe from himself?" She agreed to provide additional DNA, though her voice trembled visibly when she spoke of the potential results. "If it is him, I need to know," she whispered, her voice laced with anguish, "because I've spent my whole life wondering if the blood in my veins belongs to a good man or to a monster." In that raw, vulnerable moment, the legend of Heinrich Vogel ceased to be just a cold historical mystery. It became the heart-wrenching story of a daughter forced to confront the unbearable truth that evil can reside not only in history books, but in the quiet, treacherous corners of a family's past. Months after the safe's dramatic discovery, linguists in Munich finally achieved the daunting task of decoding the last, most cryptic section of Vogel's diary. What emerged was a chilling, fragmented portrait of a man unraveling, part confession, part terrifying manifesto. The early entries were clinical, filled with meticulous notes about logistics, clandestine funding, and coded references to the brothers and the order. But as the years relentlessly passed, the tone shifted, growing darker, more desperate. The confident officer who had once written of rebuilding the Reich now spoke in broken fragments of guilt, of haunting voices in the trees, of terrifying dreams where the faces of the dead pursued him relentlessly into the suffocating embrace of the jungle. He wrote of a purified future, a world reborn through discipline and pain, yet his words were irrevocably stained with desperation, a creeping madness. There were mentions of the mountain vault, a place he described as where the treasure of the fatherland sleeps beneath the green. Investigators theorized this might refer to a hidden cache of Nazi gold, long rumored to have vanished at the war's end, perhaps buried deep somewhere near the Paraguayan border. But the diary's final pages turned from chilling obsession to abject terror. His handwriting became jagged, frantic, the lines collapsing into an illegible chaos. The final entry, dated August 12, 1959, read only, "They are coming. I see the torches among the trees." After that, nothing. No closing signature, no trace of where he had gone. The ink trailed off mid-sentence as if the writer had been violently interrupted. Forensic testing confirmed the ink matched the same formula used in Germany during the 1940s, irrefutable proof that Vogel had clung to the vestiges, the tools of his old horrific life, until the very end. To Dr. Sora, the diary was more than mere evidence. It was a harrowing window into a mind utterly consumed by its own insidious ideology. "He fled a country," she told reporters, her voice somber, "but he never escaped the world he built inside himself." Somewhere between defiant faith and primal fear, Heinrich Vogel vanished again. This time, not into the jungle, but into history's most haunting, profound silence. For decades, the official story of Heinrich Vogel ended in that profound silence. But in a small, forgotten municipal archive in Misiones province, a faded, long-overlooked report revealed one final, tantalizing glimpse into Vogel's ultimate fate. It was dated May 1st, 1961, a single, unassuming page filed under Unverified Incident. According to local witnesses, a massive infernal fire had erupted deep in the jungle near the old river trail. The ferocious glow was visible for miles, painting the night sky an ominous, dull orange. One farmer claimed he distinctly heard shouting in German, followed by short, sharp bursts that sounded unmistakably like gunfire. Another swore he saw frantic figures running through the trees, carrying flickering torches, their voices echoing eerily through the humid night air. The next morning, a patrol was dispatched to investigate, But they found only desolation and ash. The towering trees were blackened and twisted, the clearing reduced to smoldering embers. No structure remained standing, no trace of the fortress locals once called La Fortaleza. What they did find was a scattered array of burned papers, ashes clinging stubbornly to half-melted metal bindings, and, strangely, footprints leading away from the ruins. They trailed off after a few hundred meters, dissolving into the dense forest where the undergrowth grew impossibly thick, and the dappled light dimmed to an eerie green twilight. The patrol dutifully reported the event to their superiors, but the file was never pursued. There were no official victims, no ownership records for the land, and no compelling reason to investigate a blaze in a place the government didn't even officially acknowledge existed. Within a week, the incident was forgotten, swallowed by bureaucracy and an underlying fear. Yet to those who lived nearby, it became an indelible part of local folklore. They whispered that the fire was punishment, that the jungle itself had risen to reclaim what did not belong to man. Others believed something, or someone, had come for Vogel that night. Decades later, the villagers would still point toward the hills and whisper that the forest had swallowed the fortress whole, along with the monstrous man who built it.
In 2019, long after the world had abandoned its search, two intrepid hikers, cutting their way through the dense canopy of northern Argentina, stumbled upon something truly extraordinary. They had strayed far from the marked path, following the faint, intriguing outline of a stone wall protruding from the earth beneath a thick layer of moss and tenacious vines. Their efforts uncovered the hidden entrance to a narrow chamber, carved directly into the unforgiving hillside. The air inside was stale and damp, carrying the faint, metallic tang of decay. At first they thought it might be an old mine shaft or a forgotten wartime bunker. But when their flashlight beams swept across the floor, it caught the unmistakable, chilling shape of a human skeleton. The figure lay half-collapsed against the wall, still draped in the remnants of fabric long since turned to dust. On one bony hand glimmered a tarnished silver ring, chillingly engraved with the unmistakable insignia of the SS. Beside it, fragments of a leather-bound notebook clung together by rusted clasps. The pages were mostly destroyed, but a few haunting symbols and words were legible, identical to those in the coded diary found years earlier. Authorities were immediately summoned, and within days forensic teams arrived from Buenos Aires. Using meticulous dental analysis and genetic testing against samples graciously provided by Clara Vogel, the results confirmed the unthinkable. The remains belonged to Heinrich Vogel. The SS officer, officially declared dead in 1945, had survived the cataclysmic fall of Berlin, crossed vast oceans, meticulously built a fortress in the heart of the jungle, and died alone, decades later, beneath the very canopy that had once hidden him. The chamber was sealed after the investigation, its exact location withheld from public knowledge. Forensic photographs captured the grim scene. The skeleton still clutching the rusted metal casing of a pistol, pointed downward, as if it had been his final, deliberate choice to end the haunting silence. For historians, it was the final, definitive chapter of a mystery that had spanned generations. But for those who knew the legend, it was something else entirely. Irrefutable proof that even in the most remote, forgotten corners of the world, the past never truly stays buried.
In the end, the truth was both simpler and infinitely darker than anyone had dared to imagine. Heinrich Vogel escaped the war, but he could never escape himself. He crossed oceans, changed names, and meticulously constructed walls of jungle and silence around his life. Yet the relentless ghosts he carried followed him, inexorably into the green. His fortress became his refuge, then, tragically, his cage. The twisted ideals he once served, the terrifying empire he sought to preserve, all crumbled to dust long before he drew his final solitary breath. What endured
was isolation, a man consumed by the very shadows he once believed he could command. When archaeologists and investigators painstakingly pieced together the fragmented shards of his story, they found not the triumphant legacy of a mastermind, but the tragic, haunting remains of a man who had spent decades fleeing from the inescapable echo of his own monstrous sins. The tenacious vines that strangled La Fortaleza were not merely nature reclaiming the past. They were history's quiet, immutable verdict, a slow, relentless erasure of the profound darkness he left behind. Vogel's end, somewhere between desperate confession and ultimate collapse, stands as a stark reminder of how evil rarely dies in the open. It recedes, burrows deep, and waits. Sometimes it hides in the crumbling ruins of forgotten places. Sometimes it is etched in the cryptic lines of a diary. And sometimes, most tragically, it lingers in bloodlines and memories, shaping those who never asked to inherit its terrible legacy. For Clara Vogel, the wrenching discovery brought no comfort, only a searing clarity. Her father had lived long enough to vanish twice, once from the world, and once from the very person he had been. His final, profound silence was not redemption, only surrender. The jungle had finally claimed him, and in doing so, it had kept its chilling secret for more than half a century. When investigators finally sealed the site, the trees closed in again, the rising chorus of cicadas a haunting requiem over the ruins. The fortress was gone. The story, at long last, complete, but the unsettling questions it left behind would echo far beyond the forest, because history, much like the relentless jungle, never truly forgets. It waits, patient and indifferent, for those who mistakenly believe they can outrun it, and in the end, it always finds them.